In the previous lesson, we explored the compatibility of CorelDRAW by looking at ways to open as well as import other file formats. In this lesson, we're going to do the exact opposite. We'll look at the Save As scenario to save an entire project as a different file format, but we'll also look at some exporting options that we have here in CorelDRAW X4. We're going to continue to use the same file we were working with in the previous lesson, so if you've been following along, you're ready to go. If you've skipped to this lesson and you do have the exercise files though, you can get caught up by going to the Lesson 13 folder of those exercise files and opening up G05 Certificate 2.cdr. You'll have what I have here, which is a one-pager. Now, if I want to share this with someone who doesn't have CorelDRAW, for example, maybe they use Adobe Illustrator, I can save the entire file as a different format and they'll have everything I have here. If there's a portion of this, though, that I want to share with others, I would use Export. So let's start with the Save As scenario. We'll go up to the File menu, come down to Save As, Control-Shift-S is the keyboard shortcut for that. Opens up the Save As dialog box. I'm going to choose my desktop to save this to, so I'm going to click and drag over here on the left, right up to the top and click on Desktop. And I'm going to keep the same file name, but what I'm going to change is the format, the default being a CorelDRAW format. Well, the person I'm sharing this with doesn't have CorelDRAW. They use maybe Adobe Illustrator, so I need to save to that format. Just clicking this drop down here allows me to see those other formats. And as you look at them, you'll probably notice that these are all vector-based graphics. None of these are bitmaps. In other words, you don't see JPEG in here or TIFF or any of the others like BMP. So there's Adobe Illustrator right at the top. I'm going to click on that one. Changes my Save As type drop down to show Adobe Illustrator. And now all I have to do is click the Save button if I'm keeping the same name. So I click Save. I've got some options for exporting, very important options to look at. Is the person who's using Adobe Illustrator working on a PC or a Macintosh? Maybe they're on a Mac. Well, I need to click the Macintosh radio button. Maybe they're using an older version of Adobe Illustrator. Well, for compatibility, I have a whole list of previous versions, and it goes all the way up to CS3 here at the top. CS2 is a safe one. It's fairly recent, not the newest, but anyone with a newer version of Illustrator will be able to open this. Now there is some text in here. Do I want that text exported as text so that they can actually edit the text itself? Or would I rather take a picture of that text? In other words, export the text as what we would call curves. Then they just become objects. Well, if you're not sure about fonts and what fonts they might have, you would probably want to choose curves. And if they're not going to be editing the text, this is a good option. Down below, we've got some other options for spot colors, correct colors using the current profile, simulate outline effects or complex fill curves, because both of these applications will use fills and outlines and so on in different ways, and they may appear differently when they open up in a different application. So you've got all of these options to make sure that they'll be very compatible. Include placed images and include a preview image, so if they are going to be opening this up from a list, we'll be able to allow them to see a preview of it before they do with this checked off. I'm going to keep the defaults as is and click OK. So it just takes a moment. You can see that the computer's busy converting this to an Adobe Illustrator file and saving it to my desktop. Down below in the bottom right corner, you can see the process here. There's a process bar moving along from left to right. Eventually that'll finish up and I'll have my Adobe Illustrator file done. So I can email that to someone, put it on a disk, however you want to share it, put it on a network drive. They'll be able to open it up in Adobe Illustrator. Now what if you just want to give them a portion of this file? Maybe the logo here, the Green Onion Bistro logo. Well, in that case, you want to select first. I'm going to click and drag just over the logo here, starting way out here at the edge, so I don't select anything but the logo and the text down below. In this case, I wouldn't do Save As. This is going to save the file. I would use my Export button. So if I come up here to my standard toolbar, Control-E is the shortcut for exporting, but I can click this button as well. This opens a different dialog box that looks a lot like the Save As dialog box, but the button down at the very bottom says Export. So I'm going to scroll up to the top and I'm going to export this to my desktop, just like I did when I saved my file. Look at the Save As type. It's defaulting for me to a TIFF bitmap. And the nice thing about exporting is you can export to bitmap formats. So GIFs and BMP files and JPEGs will appear on this list. Those are options that we did not see when we were using Save As, like BMP here. Corel Photo Paint images. Look at the list. It's quite extensive. JPEGs and GIFs down there, PCX. And I've got a scroll bar here to show you that this list is very extensive. Very similar to what we saw when importing as opposed to opening. So let's say I did want to export this to a JPEG. I'll just scroll up the list. It's alphabetical. I'm going to come here to JPEG bitmaps. And I'm going to click on export to export it to my selected location, which happens to be the desktop, keeping the same name, Geo5 Certificate 2. If I want to change it, no problem. Just click in here, take out what I don't want, and type in what I do. It's just the logo, so I'm going to type in logo and click export. And that's all there is to it. I've got some options now when I'm converting to a bitmap. So I can choose the image size. You'll see the original image size appearing here with 100% next to it, but if we want to make that bigger or smaller, we could. The resolution is important. Depends on where this logo is going to be used. Is it on a website? Is it going to be printed or printed commercially? The higher the resolution, the bigger the file size. You need to keep that in mind. So if you look over here at the original file size and the new file size, according to your selections, we can lower that or increase it depending on what we choose here. For example, if I bump this up to 200%, look at the file size. It went from 606 kilobytes to 2.37 megabytes. I'm going to bump that back down to 100% just to keep the file size down. Same thing would happen with the resolution. If I went down to 150, let's say, look at the new file size. It's gone way down. And that would be ideal if this logo was going to be used, for example, on a website. It doesn't have to be high resolution. But I'm going to keep it at 300. I'm going to click and drag over the 150, type in 300 because this may get printed commercially. Maintain aspect ratio is important. That's why you see when I change one value, the others change along with it. Maintain original size is another option. That locks it in now. So you can see all of these options are locked in. 100%, 300 dpi. The color mode can also be selected. RGB color mode is a 24-bit mode. If I click this drop down and go to a 32-bit mode, CMYK, you can see that will affect the new file size here. I can apply ICC profiles, always overprint using black if I was to select that. Anti-aliasing is very important so you don't get those rough edges. It's going to kind of smoothen things out. I like that feature. And when I'm done making my selections, I click OK to actually export it to my JPEG. I get an original here on the left and a preview of the result using those selections on the right. If I like what I see, all I have to do is click OK. But I do have some other options for encoding, progressive or optimize. These two checkboxes can be selected. If I deselect progressive, then I can choose optimize. I've also got my subformats, standard or optional. You can see the different ratios there. I'm going to keep the original. I can also apply some compression. Now, compressing will actually bring the file size down. I'm going to click on my preview here, and this shows me my new file size with the settings that are currently selected here. If I want more smoothing, I click and drag this slider up and click my preview, make sure it's still selected. You can see how the file size is affected, it makes it a little bit larger. If I do more compression, look at how it brings it down. If I want to keep the compression down to 0, it's going to be closer to what I'm used to seeing in the original. And I can move this around to see different parts of the logo on both sides as well as the result. So with smoothing, you can see it's a little bit blurry. I'm going to drag this smoothing slider back all the way to the left to 0, and it's pretty close to the original. I like what I see. I click OK, and it's been exported to my desktop in the JPEG format. It's still here in my file to work with, but now I can share that logo with others in a JPEG format. If it was going to be used in an application like Illustrator or Draw, for example, then I probably want to save it to a vector format so it doesn't create that rectangular shape that we're used to seeing with the white background. Then people don't have to try and make the background transparent, etc. So consider the format that you're going to be saving to and what people are using and what format is best for the scenario. Keeping in mind there's file sizes, there's formats, and of course the application that the other people might be using when they receive your logo. One other export option to talk about, and that is for an office environment. So again, I'm going to select my logo here. With it selected, I'm going to go up to the File menu this time and down to Export for Office. This is a little bit different. Here I get to export what I've selected. Notice the checkerboard in the background. That represents a transparent background. And in this case, I'm exporting to either Microsoft Office or WordPerfect Office, depending on what the person is using that I'm exporting this for. Should this graphic be best suited for compatibility, which is currently selected, or for editing? Are they going to be editing this logo? If not, compatibility is the best option. Optimize for what? For presenting, for printing. As I click this drop down, I've got desktop printing as well as commercial printing. If it's going to be printed commercially, professionally, then we need a higher resolution. And choosing commercial printing, look at the quality that appears here just by using that higher option. So when I've got exactly what I want, I click OK. And this is going to be exported to the location I choose, my desktop. Notice that the Save As type is PNG, or Portable Network Graphics. And this can be used in any of those Office applications, for example, Word or presentations. And of course, if it's going to be printed, it's going to be a nice high quality. So I'm going to type in GO logo, and the extension is going to be PNG. So I click Save, and I'm done. So a couple of different exporting options, again, keeping in mind the scenario and who you're exporting for and what they're using. Lots of different options to experiment with when saving as and exporting to. The key here is that you'll always be compatible with other applications out there.